No one knew how to contain the millionaire's fury, until the maid spoke in Arabic and completely transformed the scene. If you enjoy love and romance stories, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Coming up. From the moment she learned to walk, Isabella had learned to watch, to observe quietly from the corners, absorbing everything while making herself small, almost invisible. Now, at 28, that skill had become both her greatest asset and her most painful burden. The early morning light filtered through the massive windows of the Meridian Grand, one of London's most exclusive hotels, casting long shadows across the marble floors she knew by heart. Isabella pushed her cart down the corridor of the executive level, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished stone. In her uniform pocket, folded carefully, was a letter. Not just any letter, but one that had arrived 3 weeks ago, bearing the seal of the London School of Economics. Her thesis on international sustainable development had been accepted for publication in their most prestigious journal. But who would believe that the woman in the grey cleaning uniform, the one they barely noticed as she moved through their world like a ghost, held a first-class honours degree in international relations? Who would imagine that she spoke 5 languages fluently, including Arabic, Mandarin and Portuguese, or that she had graduated top of her class just 2 years ago? The irony wasn't lost on her. She cleaned the rooms of diplomats and business, leaders who made decisions that shaped the world, while her own diploma gathered dust in the drawer of her tiny bedsit in East London. But life had a way of making choices for you, didn't it? When her mother's condition worsened, when the medical bills started piling up, when the prestigious graduate programs required more time and money than she could afford, the cleaning job at the Meridian Grand had been a lifeline. Steady pay, decent hours, and the kind of anonymity that allowed her to think, to dream, even as she scrubbed toilets and changed sheets. Isabella paused at room 2847, checking her list. This was supposed to be one of the easier floors today, mostly empty rooms left by departing guests. She knocked gently, waited, then used her key card. The room was in chaos, clearly having been vacated in a hurry, but something made her stop. On the desk, scattered among papers and forgotten belongings, was a contract. Her eyes, trained to catch details, picked up fragments. Solar energy projects, Middle East partnerships, sustainable development initiatives. This was exactly the kind of work she had written about, dreamed about, prepared her entire academic life to be part of. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine walking into a boardroom, presenting her ideas being taken seriously. Then she shook her head, returning to reality, and began collecting the scattered papers to leave them neatly stacked for the business center. The elevator ride down to the main floor was quiet, but as soon as the doors opened onto the grand lobby, she could hear the commotion, raised voices, the kind of tension that made other guests uncomfortable and staff members nervous. Isabella's natural instinct was to take the service elevator back up, to avoid whatever drama was unfolding in the marble and gold opulence of the Meridian's main reception area. But something stopped her. Her voice, speaking rapidly in what she immediately recognized as Arabic, the tone frustrated and increasingly angry. She set her cart aside and moved closer, her curiosity overriding her usual caution. The scene before her was like something from a business drama. A man in an impeccably tailored suit, clearly Middle Eastern, was gesturing emphatically at the reception desk. His posture radiated power and barely contained fury. Around him, the hotel staff looked helpless, their polite English responses clearly not resolving whatever crisis was unfolding. Isabella could understand every word he was saying. The presidential suite he had reserved wasn't available. There had been a mistake with the booking system. He had flew in specifically for a crucial meeting, had international investors arriving in hours, and the hotel had just informed him that the accommodation he had specifically requested and paid for months in advance was not ready. The front desk manager, a thin man with nervous hands, kept repeating the same phrases. "We sincerely apologize, sir. We're working to resolve this immediately. Perhaps we could offer you our premier business suite as a temporary solution." But his words were in English, and it was becoming clear that while the guest understood some English, His frustration was making communication nearly impossible. Isabella watched as other staff members gathered at a distance, whispering among themselves. Some looked concerned, others seemed almost entertained by the spectacle. She recognized the front desk manager's panic, the way his hands shook slightly as he tried to find a solution that clearly didn't exist. The presidential suite was occupied by a German industrial family who had extended their stay, and there was no diplomatic way to move them. For years she had watched scenes like this from the sidelines. She had trained herself to be invisible, to let others handle the problems while she quietly did her job. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the contract she had just seen upstairs, the reminder of the world she had been forced to abandon. Maybe it was the recognition that she actually could help, that her skills might actually matter for once. Or maybe she was just tired of being invisible. Isabella stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The invisible line between staff and guests, between those who served and those who were served, felt as thick as a wall. But she crossed it anyway. "Excuse me," she said softly, and then, switching to fluent Arabic, continued, "Sir, I couldn't help but overhear your situation. I believe I might be able to help you find a solution." The effect was immediate and electric. The businessman stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening in surprise. The lobby, which had been buzzing with tension and whispered conversations, fell, silent. Isabella could feel every eye in the vicinity turning toward her, could sense the shock and disapproval radiating from some of the staff members who recognized her uniform. But she kept her focus on the man in front of her. His expression had shifted from anger to curiosity, and she could see intelligence in his dark eyes as he assessed this unexpected development. "You speak Arabic," he said in that language, his voice carrying both surprise and a hint of relief. "I do," Isabella replied, maintaining her calm composure despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "And I understand your frustration. The presidential suite booking system error is unfortunate, but there might be alternative solutions that could meet your specific needs." She turned slightly, including the flustered front desk manager in the conversation, switching back to English. "Mr. Harrison, the gentleman's primary concerns are privacy for his business meetings, a separate conference area, and accommodation for his security detail. The presidential suite isn't actually necessary if we can provide those specific requirements." The businessman's eyebrows rose slightly. Not only was she translating, but she was identifying solutions. "What do you propose?" he asked in Arabic. Isabella felt a surge of confidence. This was the kind of problem-solving she had been trained for, the kind of diplomatic thinking that her degree had prepared her for, even if she had never imagined using it while wearing a cleaning uniform in a hotel lobby. "The Meridian has a private executive floor that's currently underutilized," she said, switching between languages smoothly to keep both men informed. "It includes a full suite, 2 adjoining rooms for security, and access to the private conference room. More importantly, it has a separate entrance and elevator access, which would provide the discretion you need for your meetings. The total space is actually larger than the presidential suite, and the conference facilities are more advanced." She paused, reading the businessman's expression. He was listening intently, no longer showing signs of the frustration that had dominated the lobby moments before. "Additionally," she continued in Arabic, "that floor has enhanced telecommunications equipment and video conferencing capabilities, which I assume would be valuable for your international calls and meetings." For a long moment, the lobby remained silent. Isabella could feel the weight of everyone's stares, could sense the front desk manager's confusion and the growing murmur of other staff members trying to understand what was happening. Then slowly the businessman smiled. It was a small smile but genuine, and it transformed his entire demeanor. "That," he said in accented but clear English, looking directly at Isabella, "sounds like exactly what I need." Mr. Harrison, the front desk manager, looked between them, with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. Yes, of course, the executive floor. That's actually a brilliant solution. I'll have someone prepare those rooms immediately." But the businessman raised a hand, stopping him. His gaze remained fixed on Isabella. "What is your name?" he asked. Isabella, she replied, suddenly very aware of her uniform, of the cleaning cart she had abandoned by the elevator, of all, the eyes still watching this unexpected scene. Isabella, he repeated as if testing how the name felt. I'm Ahmed Al-Mansouri, and I think we should talk. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Mr. Harrison scurried away to arrange the new accommodation, clearly relieved to have a solution but still visibly shaken by the entire experience. Other staff members began to disperse, though Isabella could feel their lingering glances and sense the whispered conversations that would soon spread throughout the hotel. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, meanwhile, studied her with the kind of attention that made her both nervous and strangely energized. There was something in his gaze that she hadn't experienced in a long time, something that felt like genuine recognition of her as a person, not just as part of the hotel's invisible workforce. You have training in international relations, he said. It wasn't a question. Isabella nodded, unsure how much to reveal. I do. And you're working as housekeeping staff. This time there was a question in his statement, though not a judgmental one. More like curiosity, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. Sometimes life makes choices for us, she said quietly. Ahmed studied her for another moment, then nodded, as if he understood something that hadn't been spoken aloud. Indeed it does, but sometimes life also presents opportunities. I have a proposition for you, Isabella. Her heart skipped. A proposition? I'm in London for 3 weeks, managing a complex international project, solar energy development, across multiple countries, involving government partnerships and private investors. It requires someone with cultural sensitivity, language skills, and the ability to navigate diplomatic challenges. He paused, his expression serious. What just happened here suggests you might have those skills. Isabella felt the world shifting around her, as if everything she had known about her life was suddenly up in the air. I'm not sure I understand. I need a project coordinator, someone who can work with me personally, handle communications, manage cultural aspects of negotiations, and help ensure that nothing falls through the cracks the way this hotel reservation did. His smile returned. The pay would be substantially more than housekeeping, and it would be a chance to use your actual qualifications. For a moment, Isabella couldn't speak. The offer felt too good to be true, too much like the dreams she had learned to set aside. But there was something in Ahmed's manner, something genuine and professional, that made her believe he was serious. But you don't know anything about me, she managed to say. I know you speak multiple languages fluently. I know you can think quickly under pressure and identify solutions that others miss. I know you have formal training in international relations, and I know you're currently underemployed. He gestured toward her uniform. That combination suggests someone I could work with. Isabella's mind raced. 3 weeks, a chance to actually use her education, her skills, money that could help with her mother's medical bills, that could maybe finally give her the breathing room to plan for a real future. But doubt crept in just as quickly. What if she failed? What if she was out of her depth? What if this was all some kind of mistake or misunderstanding? I'd need to think about it, she said, playing for time. Ahmed nodded, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a business card. Of course, but I'll need an answer by tomorrow morning. My first major meeting is tomorrow afternoon, and I'd rather have someone competent helping me than risk another situation like today's accommodation disaster. Isabella took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, CEO, Renewable Horizons International. Below his name were phone numbers, email addresses, and office locations in 3 different countries. Think about it, he said gently. But Isabella, remember that opportunities like this don't come along often. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to reach for them. With that, he turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Isabella standing in the middle of the lobby, holding a business card that felt like it might change everything. Around her, the hotel continued its normal rhythm, but nothing felt normal anymore. The invisible woman had been seen, had been recognized, had been offered a chance to step out of the shadows. The question now was whether she had the courage to take it. Isabella barely slept that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the cramped bedsit she shared with her mother, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of some unknown country. The business card sat on her bedside table, catching the orange glow from the street lamp outside. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, CEO, Renewable Horizons International. The letters seemed to shimmer in the half-light, like a promise or a challenge she couldn't quite grasp. Her mother, Eleanor, had been asleep when Isabella came home, but now she could hear her coughing in the next room. That persistent, rattling cough that the doctors said would improve with time and proper treatment. Treatment that cost money, money that Isabella's hotel salary barely covered, leaving nothing for the kind of care her mother really needed. Isabella sat up, reaching for her laptop. It was an old machine, but it worked well enough for research. Within minutes, she had pulled up everything she could find about Ahmed Al-Mansouri and his company. What she discovered made her heart race even faster than his unexpected offer. Renewable Horizons International wasn't just any company. It was a major player in sustainable energy development, with projects spanning 3 continents. Ahmed himself had been featured in financial magazines as one of the rising stars in green technology. His company's work in bringing solar energy to developing nations had won international recognition. This wasn't some small consulting job, she realized. This was the kind of work she had dreamed about doing when she was writing her thesis, the kind of meaningful career that could actually make a difference in the world. But as she read more, the magnitude of what he was offering began to sink in. The people he worked with, the scale of the negotiations he managed, the complexity of the international partnerships his company facilitated. What if she wasn't ready for this? What if her degree and her languages weren't enough? What if she embarrassed herself or worse, damaged some crucial negotiation? The doubt spiral was familiar. It was the same voice that had whispered to her when she was considering graduate school, the same fear that had made her take the hotel job instead of holding out for something in her field. The voice that reminded her where she came from, that people like her didn't get chances like this. But there was another voice too, quieter but growing stronger. It was the voice that had made her step forward in the hotel lobby, that had prompted her to speak to Ahmed in Arabic, that had identified the solution when everyone else was stuck in panic. It was the voice of the woman who had graduated first in her class, who had written a thesis that was going to be published, who spoke 5 languages and understood international relations better than most people with jobs at prestigious consulting firms. At 6 in the morning, Isabella made her decision. She dressed carefully in the one professional outfit she owned, a navy blue suit she had bought for job interviews 2 years ago. It was simple, but well cut, and it made her feel more like the woman she was supposed to be, and less like the invisible cleaning lady she had become. Her mother was awake, sitting at their tiny kitchen table with a cup of tea and the morning paper. Helena looked up as Isabella emerged from her room, taking in the suit, the careful makeup, the nervous energy radiating from her daughter. "You look like you're going somewhere important," Helena said, her voice still rough from the night's coughing. Isabella sat down across from her mother, the business card in her hand. "Mama, I need to tell you something. Yesterday at work, something happened, something that might change everything." She told her mother about the encounter with Ahmed, about his offer, about the opportunity to work in international development for 3 weeks. Elena listened without interrupting, her dark eyes growing wider as Isabella described the scope of what was being offered. When Isabella finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Isabella, I've watched you clean hotel rooms for 2 years, and every day I've seen a piece of your spirit disappear," she said softly. "You were meant for more than this. We both know it. The only question is whether you're brave enough to claim it. But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" Elena smiled, the kind of smile that had gotten Isabella through childhood struggles and academic challenges. "Mija, you graduated top of your class. You speak languages most people can't even pronounce. You see solutions where other people see problems. The question isn't whether you're good enough. The question is whether you're willing to let fear keep you small." 2 hours later, Isabella stood outside the executive offices of Renewable Horizons, International's London branch. The building was sleek glass and steel, the kind of place she had imagined working in when she was studying international relations. Her palms were sweating as she approached the reception desk. "I have an appointment with Ahmed Al-Mansouri," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, looked Isabella up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "I don't see anything on his calendar. Are you sure you have the right day?" Before Isabella could respond, Ahmed's voice came from behind her. "She's exactly where she should be." Isabella turned to see him striding across the lobby, looking even more imposing in his business attire than he had in the hotel. But his smile was warm, genuine, and she felt some of her nervousness fade. "Isabella, I wasn't certain you would." "Come?" "I almost didn't," she admitted. "Honesty? Good. We'll need that." He gestured toward the elevators. "Shall we discuss what this opportunity actually involves?" The next hour passed in a whirlwind of information. Ahmed's London office was sophisticated but comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames. He explained that Renewable Horizons was in the final stages of negotiating a massive solar energy project that would span 5 countries. The London meetings were crucial, bringing together government representatives, private investors, and international development organizations. "The challenge," Ahmed explained, "is that each party speaks different languages, both literally and figuratively. Government officials think in terms of policy and public benefit. Private investors focus on returns and risk mitigation. International organizations prioritize humanitarian impact and sustainability metrics. My job is to help them find common ground." Isabella listened, her excitement building. This was exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered negotiation that she had studied in her coursework, the kind of work that required cultural sensitivity, linguistic skill, and strategic thinking. "What would my role be specifically?" she asked. "Communications coordinator and cultural liaison. You'd prepare briefing materials, translate not just languages but concepts between different stakeholders, help me anticipate potential misunderstandings before they become problems, and provide on-ground intelligence about what's really happening in meetings." Ahmed leaned back in his chair. "Based on what I saw yesterday, I believe you could excel at this work." The salary he offered was more than she made in 6 months at the hotel. Even after taxes, it would be enough to get her mother proper medical care and maybe, just maybe, give Isabella the financial stability to plan for her own future. "When would I start?" she asked. "This afternoon. Our first major meeting is tomorrow, and I need someone who can hit the ground running." Isabella felt her heart hammering again, but this time it was excitement rather than fear. "Then I accept." Ahmed's smile was brilliant. "Welcome to the team, Isabella." The rest of that first day was a baptism by fire. Ahmed's assistant, Patricia, a efficiency-minded woman in her 40s, handed Isabella a stack of files thick enough to be a novel. Briefing documents on solar technology, cultural profiles of the various international delegations, financial projections, environmental impact studies, and political analyses of each country involved in the project. "You'll need to be familiar with all of this by tomorrow morning," Patricia said briskly. "Ahmed expects his team to be completely prepared for every meeting." Isabella spent the afternoon absorbing information at a rate that reminded her of her university days. The project was even more ambitious than Ahmed had initially described. If successful, it would bring clean energy to rural communities across Africa and the Middle East, while creating a sustainable business model that could be replicated globally. The stakes were enormous, both financially and humanitarianly. But, as she read, she began to see potential issues that weren't addressed in the formal documents. Cultural considerations that might affect implementation, political sensitivities that could derail negotiations, communication gaps that might lead to misunderstandings. This was exactly the kind of analysis her training had prepared her for. That evening, Ahmed asked her to join him for dinner to discuss her initial observations. They went to a quiet restaurant near his office, and for the first time since they had met, the conversation felt more personal. "You've been reading for 6 hours straight," he observed. "What's your assessment?" Isabella hesitated, then decided to be direct. "The project is brilliant and the financial structure is sound, but I think there are some cultural and political considerations that might need more attention." Such as? She pulled out the notes she had made. The rural communities in 3 of the target countries have traditional land use patterns that aren't addressed in the implementation plans. In Morocco, for example, the proposed sites overlap with seasonal grazing areas that have been used by the same families for generations. The project documents treat this as a minor logistical issue, but in my assessment, it could become a major political obstacle if it's not handled carefully. Ahmed's eyebrows rose. "You identified that in one afternoon of reading?" "My thesis focused on sustainable development in rural communities. I wrote extensively about the importance of community consultation and traditional land rights in international development projects." Isabella felt her confidence growing as she spoke. About her area of expertise, "I also noticed potential communication issues between the European investors and the government representatives from the participating countries. The language they're using in the planning documents suggests different expectations about timeline and implementation phases." For a moment, Ahmed was quiet, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he smiled, but it was different from his previous smiles. This one held respect, recognition, and something that might have been surprise. "Isabella, in one day you've identified issues that my previous consultant missed in 2 months of analysis." He leaned forward slightly. "I think I may have underestimated what you could bring to this project." The warmth in his voice made something flutter in Isabella's chest, something that had nothing to do with professional validation and everything to do with the way he looked at her when he spoke. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that this was business, that she couldn't afford to complicate this opportunity with personal feelings. But as they talked through dinner, discussing strategy and cultural nuances and the complexities of international development, Isabella found herself thinking that this felt like more than just a job. It felt like coming home to herself, like remembering who she was supposed to be. When Ahmed walked her to the tube station afterward, he paused at the entrance. "Isabella, I want you to know that today confirmed my instinct about you. You're going to be an asset to this project, but more than that, I think this work is going to be good for you too." "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing something in me that I had almost stopped seeing in myself." "Sometimes we need other people to remind us who we really are," he replied. "I'll see you tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work to do." As Isabella rode the tube home that night, she caught her reflection in the dark window. For the first time in 2 years, she looked like herself again. Not the invisible cleaning woman, not the forgotten graduate struggling to make ends meet, but the intelligent, capable woman she had worked so hard to become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, for the first time in years, Isabella felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The transformation had begun, and there was no going back. The first week passed in a blur of 14-hour days and meetings that stretched late into the evening. Isabella threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. Every morning she arrived at the office before anyone else, and every night she was among the last to leave. The stack of briefing materials had become her constant companion, along with a notebook where she tracked cultural nuances, potential communication issues, and strategic insights that might prove valuable. Ahmed had been right about one thing. She was a natural at this work. The complex dance of international negotiations, the delicate balance of languages and cultural expectations, the need to translate not just words, but entire ways of thinking from one group to another. It all felt intuitive to her, in a way that nothing had since university. But with each passing day, she became increasingly aware that not everyone was happy about her sudden prominence in the project. She came from nowhere, Isabella overheard Patricia telling another staff member during a coffee break. One day she's cleaning toilets. The next day, Ahmed is treating her like his right-hand advisor. It doesn't make sense. The whispered conversations stopped when Isabella entered rooms. Other staff members, people who had been friendly enough during her first days, now regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. She understood their skepticism. Honestly, she did. Her rise from hotel cleaning staff to project coordinator must have seemed impossible, almost insulting to people who had worked their way up through traditional channels. But what hurt more than their suspicion was their assumption about why Ahmed had chosen her. She caught fragments of conversations, implications that made her stomach turn. The suggestion that a beautiful woman with an unusual background had been selected for reasons that had nothing to do with her qualifications. "I don't see why Ahmed needs a special cultural consultant anyway," she heard David Chen, the project's financial analyst, telling another colleague. "We've managed international projects before, without needing someone to hold our hands through every cultural interaction." Isabella had been standing outside the conference room, preparing to deliver a briefing on the upcoming meeting with Moroccan government representatives. David's words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were necessarily cruel, but because they echoed her own deepest fears. Was she really adding value to this project, or was she just an expensive token hired to make Ahmed look culturally sensitive? That afternoon's meeting would prove to be her first real test. The Moroccan delegation consisted of 3 government officials, the Deputy Minister of Energy, a senior policy advisor, and a local community liaison. Isabella had spent hours preparing cultural briefings for Ahmed and the team, outlining not just linguistic considerations, but deeper cultural values that might affect how the officials approached negotiations. In traditional Moroccan culture, she had explained to Ahmed the night before, decisions like this often involve extensive consultation with community elders and religious leaders. The officials won't just be thinking about economic benefits, but about how the project aligns with community values and long-term social stability. If we approach this purely as a business transaction, we may miss opportunities to build trust and partnership. Ahmed had listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about how to structure the presentation to address these deeper concerns. For the first time since starting the job, Isabella felt confident that she was contributing something genuinely valuable. The meeting began well. Isabella handled the initial introductions in Arabic, which clearly pleased the Moroccan officials. The formal presentation about the solar project's technical aspects went smoothly, with Ahmed demonstrating his usual skill at explaining complex concepts in accessible terms. But then, David Chen began discussing the financial projections, and Isabella noticed the subtle shift in the Moroccans' body language. Their polite attention became slightly strained. The deputy minister began glancing at his colleagues with expressions that Isabella recognized as concern, though she wasn't sure the rest of the team had picked up on it. David was presenting the project as a purely economic opportunity, focusing on job creation and revenue generation. His language was precise, professional, and completely tone-deaf to the cultural context Isabella had tried to prepare them for. The return on investment timeline projects significant economic benefits, beginning in year 2 of implementation, David was saying, pointing to charts and graphs that clearly meant nothing to their guests. We anticipate that local employment opportunities will increase productivity metrics across the target communities. Isabella watched the Moroccan officials exchange another glance, and she realized with growing alarm that David's presentation was actively alienating the very people they were trying to partner with. The language was too clinical, too focused on metrics and profits, and it completely ignored the community and environmental values that she knew were central to Moroccan approaches to development projects. She glanced at Ahmed, who was focused on David's presentation, and realized that he might not be picking up on the subtle signs of discomfort from their guests. The meeting was slipping away, and she was the only one who seemed to notice. Isabella faced a choice. She could stay quiet, avoid making waves, and hope that someone else would notice the problem. Or she could risk embarrassing David, challenging the established hierarchy, and potentially making enemies among her colleagues. But as she watched the deputy minister's expression grow more reserved, She realized that the success of the entire project might depend on what happened in the next few minutes. Isabella stood up, her heart pounding. "Forgive me, David," she said softly, "but I think our guests might have some questions about the community impact aspects of the project. Perhaps we could address those concerns before continuing with the financial projections." David paused, mid-sentence, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "I think the economic benefits speak for themselves, Isabella. We can address community concerns afterward." But the deputy minister leaned forward and in Arabic said quietly, "Actually, that would be helpful. We have some questions about how the project aligns with community development goals." Isabella translated for the room, then continued in Arabic, "Perhaps you could share your specific concerns. I believe we can address them directly." What followed was a 20-minute conversation that transformed the entire dynamic of the meeting. The Moroccan officials explained their priorities: environmental sustainability, community ownership, respect for traditional land use, and long-term social benefits that went beyond mere job creation. Isabella translated not just their words, but their underlying concerns, helping Ahmed and the team understand that for the Moroccan government this wasn't just about economics. It was about building a model of development that honored both progress and tradition. Ahmed, to his credit, immediately grasped what Isabella was facilitating. He shifted the conversation away from purely financial metrics and began discussing the project's environmental benefits, its potential for community ownership, and its alignment with Morocco's long-term sustainability goals. By the end of the meeting, the mood had completely changed. The deputy minister was smiling, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and community consultation processes. Before leaving, he shook Isabella's hand and said in Arabic, "Thank you for helping us understand each other. This is the kind of partnership we've been hoping for." After the Moroccan delegation left, the conference room fell silent. David was gathering his papers with barely concealed irritation. Patricia was studying Isabella with an unreadable expression. Ahmed stood at the window, looking out at the London skyline. "That was well done," Ahmed said finally, turning to face the room. "Isabella, your intervention probably saved that negotiation. David, I'll need you to revise the financial projections to emphasize long-term community benefits and environmental sustainability metrics." David's jaw tightened. "I think we're overthinking this, Ahmed. At the end of the day, these are business decisions. All this cultural sensitivity is fine, but we can't lose sight of the bottom line." "The bottom line," Ahmed replied calmly, "is that without local government support and community buy-in, we don't have a project at all." Isabella understood that. "I trust her judgment on these matters." The words sent a thrill through Isabella's chest, but she could also feel the weight of David's resentment and Patricia's calculating stare. She had proven her value, but she had also made enemies. After the others left, Ahmed lingered in the conference room with Isabella. "You took a risk today," he said, interrupting David's presentation, changing the direction of the meeting. "That took courage." "I was afraid I had overstepped," Isabella admitted, "but I could see that we were losing them. You were right, and that's exactly why I need you on this team." Ahmed moved closer, and Isabella caught the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and subtly masculine. "So, Isabella, I want you to know that your insights are invaluable to this project. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." There was something in his voice, something warmer than professional appreciation, that made Isabella's pulse quicken. For a moment, they stood there in the empty conference room, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and she felt the air between them charged with an energy that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. Then Ahmed stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. "We have the investor meeting tomorrow. I'll need your cultural briefings on the German and Swiss representatives." "Of course," Isabella managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. But as she gathered her papers and prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them during those charged few seconds The relationship was becoming more complex, more dangerous, and she wasn't sure she had the experience to navigate what was happening. That evening, Isabella worked late in the office, preparing for the next day's meetings. The building was nearly empty, just the cleaning staff making their rounds and the occasional lawyer or consultant burning the midnight oil. She was deep in concentration when she heard voices from the break room down the hall. "She's sleeping." Her way to the top, obviously. The voice belonged to David, and Isabella felt her blood run cold. "I don't know about that," Patricia replied, though her tone was thoughtful rather than defensive. "She does seem to know what she's talking about." "Oh, please. 6 months ago she was cleaning hotel rooms and now Ahmed treats her like some kind of strategic genius. Come on, Patricia. We both know what's really going on here." "Even if that were true," Patricia said slowly, "she did save that meeting today." The Moroccans were about to walk out before she intervened. "Lucky guess," David scoffed. "Or maybe Ahmed briefed her ahead of time to make it look like she was adding value. This whole thing is getting ridiculous." Isabella sat frozen at her desk, her hands shaking with anger and humiliation. Every insecurity she had felt since starting this job was being voiced in the break room by her colleagues. The suggestion that she was sleeping with Ahmed, that her insights were fabricated, that her success was based on anything other than her actual skills and knowledge. It was exactly what she had feared people would think. But as the initial shock faded, Isabella felt something else rising in her chest. Not just anger, but determination. She knew her worth, knew the value of what she brought to this project. Tomorrow's meeting would be her chance to prove it beyond any doubt. She spent the rest of the night preparing the most comprehensive cultural analysis she had ever created, diving deep into research about German and Swiss business culture, investment, priorities and negotiation styles. By the time she finally went home at 3 in the morning, she was exhausted but confident. She would show David, Patricia, and anyone else who doubted her exactly what Isabella Rodriguez was capable of. And she would do it on her own terms, with her own skills, regardless of what anyone assumed about her relationship with Ahmed. The real test was coming, and she was ready for it. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, jolting Isabella from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. Ahmed's voice on the phone was tense, urgent in a way she'd never heard before. "Isabella, I need you at the office immediately. We have a crisis." She was dressed and on the tube within 20 minutes, her mind racing through possibilities. Had one of the governments pulled out? Had there been a problem with the environmental assessments? Had someone discovered financial irregularities? Nothing could have prepared her for what she found when she arrived at the office. Ahmed was pacing behind his desk like a caged animal, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Patricia sat in one of the chairs, her face pale and drawn. David stood by the window, his arms crossed, wearing an expression that somehow managed to combine concern with barely concealed satisfaction. "What's happened?" Isabella asked. Ahmed turned to face her, and she could see the strain in his eyes. "The Swiss investor group has withdrawn their funding, all of it, effective immediately." Isabella felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet. The Swiss group represented 40% of the project's total funding. Without them, the entire initiative would collapse. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Apparently," David said, his tone carrying an undertone that made Isabella's skin crawl, "they received some information that made them question the project's viability and management." Ahmed shot David a sharp look. "What David is trying to say is that someone provided the Swiss group with a report questioning our cultural consultation process. They were told that our local partnerships were superficial, that we hadn't done adequate community research, and that the project was likely to face significant local resistance." Isabella's heart sank. "But that's not true. The community consultation has been extensive. The Moroccan officials were enthusiastic about the partnership approach." "I know that," Ahmed said grimly. "You know that. But someone has convinced the Swiss investors otherwise, and they're spooked." "Who would do something like that?" Isabella asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she was beginning to suspect. Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably. "The report was submitted by an external consultant. someone who claimed to have inside knowledge of the project's cultural assessment process. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Isabella looked at David, whose expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to something approaching panic as he realized what she was figuring out. "You," Isabella said quietly, "you sabotaged the project." "That's ridiculous," David blustered. "I would never—" "You think I'm a fraud," Isabella interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "You think Ahmed hired me for personal reasons rather than professional ones. So you decided to prove your point by undermining the cultural consultation work, thinking it would expose me as incompetent and bring down the project in the process." The silence in the room was deafening. David's face had gone red, but he wasn't denying the accusation. Ahmed's voice when he spoke was deadly quiet. "David, is this true?" "I was protecting the company," David said defensively. "This whole cultural consultant thing was a mistake from the beginning. We've been doing international projects for years without needing someone to explain every cultural nuance. I thought if the investors saw the flaws in the approach, you thought if you destroyed Isabella's credibility, it would prove your point," Ahmed finished coldly. "Even if it meant destroying a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars and affecting thousands of people who need clean energy access." "I didn't think they'd pull all their funding," David protested weakly. Isabella stared at him, feeling a mixture of anger and something approaching pity. David had been so invested in proving her unworthy that he had been willing to sabotage everything Ahmed had worked for. "The meeting with the Swiss group is in 4 hours, Ahmed said, turning away from David with obvious disgust. "If we can't convince them to reconsider, the project is dead." Patricia spoke up for the first time since Isabella had arrived. "Ahmed, I've been trying to reach them all morning. They won't take calls. Their assistant says the decision is final." Isabella felt something crystallizing inside her, the same feeling she had experienced in the hotel lobby when she had decided to step forward and help Ahmed with the accommodation crisis. But this time the stakes were infinitely higher. "What if I went to them directly?" she said. Everyone turned to look at her. Ahmed frowned. "Isabella, they won't see us. They've made their decision." "They won't see you," she corrected. "But they might see me." She moved to Ahmed's desk, pulling up the files on the Swiss investor group. "Their concern is about cultural consultation and community partnerships, right? David's report suggested that we haven't done adequate local research and that the communities weren't properly consulted." "Right," Ahmed said slowly. "Clearly not." Seeing where she was going with this. "Then I need to go to them with evidence, not just reports and briefing documents, but actual proof of community engagement, documentation of the consultation process, testimonials from community leaders, evidence of local government support." "Yasaitas Kain." Isabella's voice grew more confident as the plan took shape in her mind. "I need to show them that David's report was not just wrong, but maliciously wrong." "Isabella," Patricia said carefully, "these are sophisticated investors. They're not going to be impressed by a few testimonial letters." "No," Isabella agreed, "but they might be impressed by a comprehensive cultural impact assessment that demonstrates genuine community partnership and addresses every concern they've raised about local resistance." She turned to Ahmed. "Give me 3 hours. I'm going to create the most thorough cultural consultation report they've ever seen, and then I'm going to present it to them personally." Ahmed stared at her. "Isabella, you can't just show up at their hotel and demand a meeting." "Watch me," she said quietly. The next 3 hours passed in a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, and document preparation. Isabella contacted every person she had spoken with over the past 2 weeks, every government official, community liaison, and local partner associated with the project. She called in favors from former professors, reached out to colleagues from university who are now working in international development, and even contacted journalists who had covered similar sustainable energy projects. By noon, she had assembled something unprecedented, a real-time documentation of community engagement that included video testimonials from Moroccan community leaders, written endorsements from government officials, environmental impact assessments from 3 independent organizations, and a detailed timeline showing months of careful consultation and partnership development. But more than that, she had something that David's sabotage report lacked completely: authenticity. Every piece of evidence came from real people who were genuinely excited about the project, who had been genuinely consulted, who genuinely saw it as beneficial for their communities. At 1 o'clock, Isabella stood outside the Four Seasons Hotel, where the Swiss investor group was staying. She wore her best suit, carried a leather portfolio that Ahmed had lent her, and felt more nervous than she had ever been in her life. The investor's suite was on the 20th floor. Isabella talked her way past the concierge, charmed the elevator operator, and somehow convinced the floor attendant to let her know which room belonged to Klaus Müller, the lead Swiss investor. When she knocked on the door of Suite 2015, she had no idea if her plan would work or if she was about to make the biggest fool of herself in professional history. Klaus Müller was a man in his 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with the kind of presence that came from making billion-dollar decisions on a regular basis. When he opened the door and saw Isabella standing in the hallway, his expression was a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Miss Rodriguez, is it?" he said in accented English. "I believe my assistant made it clear that we were not taking any meetings regarding the Renewable Horizons project. Mr. Müller, I understand your concerns about the project, but I believe you've been given incomplete information. I'd like 5 minutes to show you what the community consultation process actually looks like." He studied her for a long moment. "Young lady, my decision is based on a comprehensive report that suggests your cultural assessment work was superficial at best and potentially misleading at worst." Isabella took a deep breath. "Sir, that report was prepared by someone who has never spoken to a single community member, never visited any of the project sites, and never participated in any of the cultural consultation meetings. I have." Something in her tone must have caught his attention, because after another moment of consideration, he stepped aside and gestured her into the suite. What followed was the most important presentation of Isabella's life. She walked Klaus Müller through every aspect of the community consultation process, showing him videos of community meetings where local leaders expressed their enthusiasm for the project. She showed him government documents that demonstrated official support at multiple levels. She presented environmental assessments that proved the project would actually enhance local sustainability efforts. But most importantly, she showed him the depth of cultural understanding that had gone into every aspect of the project planning. "Mr. Müller," she said as she concluded her presentation, "David Chen's report suggested that we hadn't considered traditional land use, patterns or community social structures. But look at these maps." She spread out detailed charts showing how the solar installations had been planned around traditional grazing areas, how they incorporated existing community gathering spaces, how they were designed to enhance rather than disrupt local economic patterns. "This level of planning doesn't happen by accident," she continued. "It happens because someone took the time to understand not just the technology, but the people who will be living with it." Klaus Müller was quiet for a long time, studying the documents she had presented. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed completely. "Miss Rodriguez, this is remarkable work. Why wasn't I shown this level of detail in our original briefings?" "Because David Chen believed that cultural consultation was unnecessary window dressing," Isabella replied honestly. "He thought that focusing on financial returns and technical specifications was sufficient. He was wrong." Müller nodded slowly. "Indeed he was. Miss Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. And more importantly, I owe your project a reconsideration." 2 hours later, Isabella walked into Ahmed's office with a signed letter of renewed commitment from the Swiss investor group. Not just for their original funding level, but for an increased investment, based on their confidence in the project's comprehensive community engagement approach. Ahmed looked up from his desk as she entered, his expression shifting from resignation to disbelief as he saw the letter in her hand. "Isabella, tell me that's what I think it is." "The Swiss group is back in," she said, setting the letter on his desk. Full funding restored, plus an additional 20% for community development initiatives. For a moment, Ahmed just stared at the letter. Then he stood up, moved around his desk, and before Isabella realized what was happening, he had wrapped her in his arms. It was meant to be a congratulatory embrace, a moment of professional celebration. But as Isabella felt the strength of his arms around her, smelled the familiar scent of his cologne, felt the warmth of his body against hers, something shifted between them. Ahmed pulled back slightly, his hands still on her shoulders, his face closer to hers than it had ever been. "Isabella, what you did today. You saved the project. You saved months of work, millions of dollars, and partnerships that will benefit thousands of people." "I just did my job," she said softly, very aware of how close they were standing. "No," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You did something extraordinary. You proved that you're not just qualified for this work, you're exceptional at it." Isabella felt her heart racing as she looked into his dark eyes, saw something there that went far beyond professional admiration. "Ahmed, I know this complicates things," he said, not moving away. "I know there are questions about propriety, about power dynamics, about what people will say." "There are," she agreed, though she made no move to step out of his embrace. "But Isabella, what I feel for you has nothing to do with this job, nothing to do with your work performance, nothing to do with anything except the remarkable woman you are." And then he kissed her, softly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. It was a kiss that acknowledged everything that had been building between them for weeks, all the professional respect and personal attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface of their working relationship. When they finally broke apart, Isabella felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "What happens now?" she asked. Ahmed smiled, the first truly relaxed smile she had seen from him in days. "Now we finish this project together, and then we figure out what comes next." 3 months later, Isabella stood in a village outside of Marrakesh, watching as the first solar panels of the Renewable Horizons project were installed. The sun was setting over the Atlas Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the solar panels caught the last light of day like mirrors, reflecting the future. The project had been a complete success, not just technically and financially, but socially. The communities had embraced the initiative, the governments had provided full support, and the investors had been so impressed with the comprehensive cultural integration approach that they had asked Renewable Horizons to replicate the model in 3 other countries. Isabella had been promoted to Director of Cultural Integration and Community Partnerships, a position created specifically for her and the unique skill set she brought to international development projects. She now led a team of cultural consultants and community liaison specialists, and her approach to sustainable development had become a model for other international companies. But more than professional success, she had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for, a sense of purpose, a feeling of being exactly where she belonged. Ahmed appeared beside her as she watched the installation work. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved from professional partnership to something deeper and more complex. They were partners in every sense of the word now, though they had been careful to maintain clear boundaries between their personal and professional relationships. "Thinking about anything in particular?" he asked. Isabella smiled, thinking about the hotel cleaning uniform that now hung in the back of her closet in London, a reminder of how far she had come. "Just reflecting on how much can change when you're brave enough to speak up." "Indeed," Ahmed said, taking her hand. "Sometimes the most important moments are the ones when we decide to stop being invisible." As they stood there together, watching the sun set over a project that would bring clean energy to thousands of people, Isabella realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the woman who cleaned hotel rooms while her dreams gathered dust in a drawer. She was exactly who she was meant to be. Her mother, Eleanor, had been right all those months ago in their tiny London kitchen. The question was never whether Isabella was good enough. The question was whether she was willing to let fear keep her small. She had chosen courage instead, and it had changed everything. 3 weeks later, Ahmed proposed to her in the same hotel lobby where they had first met, presenting her with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a symbol not of rescue or salvation, but of partnership between equals. Isabella's answer was yes, not because she needed saving, but because she had found someone who saw her exactly as she was, brilliant, capable, and deserving of love that honored her strength rather than trying to diminish it. Their wedding 6 months later was a celebration of two cultures, two languages, two hearts that had found each other across the invisible lines that too often keep people apart. Isabella wore her grandmother's lace mantilla with Ahmed's mother's traditional gold jewelry, a perfect fusion of the worlds that had shaped them both. As they danced at their reception, surrounded by friends and colleagues from around the world, Isabella caught sight of David Chen sitting at a corner table. He had been demoted after his sabotage attempt was discovered, but Ahmed had chosen not to fire him, believing in second chances. David raised his glass to her with what might have been respect, and Isabella nodded back graciously. Even he had learned eventually to see her for who she really was. A year later, Isabella and Ahmed were living between London and Dubai, running Renewable Horizons together and expanding their community-focused approach to sustainable development across 3 continents. Isabella's mother had moved to London permanently, her health fully restored, and her pride in her daughter evident to everyone who met them. And sometimes, late at night when she was working in her home office, Isabella would look at the framed photo on her desk, not her diploma, though that was there too, not her wedding picture, though she treasured that as well, but a photo from that first project in Morocco, showing her standing with community leaders and government officials, all of them smiling as they celebrated the successful completion of the solar installation. In that photo, Isabella was visible in every sense of the word, not because someone had decided to notice her, but because she had decided to step into the light and claim her place in the world. The invisible woman had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens, not when the world changes, but when we change how we see ourselves.